How long have you been with us? Melody, 29 years, is it? Ethan Harris leaned back in his leather chair, his voice eerily casual. That's quite the accomplishment, 29 years, and 362 days to be exact. I replied, my stomach nodding as I noticed the blue binder on his desk. In all my years at Silverline Industries, I'd never been called into executive suite on a Friday afternoon. Something was wrong. I'm Margaret Carter, 61 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I was the lead audit manager at one of Cleveland's largest manufacturing companies. I've spent nearly 3 decades ensuring that Silverline operated within legal parameters, documenting irregularities, and standing firm. When others wanted easy solutions to complex problems, my pension was set to fully vest on Monday. Just 3 days away, the milestone I'd worked my entire adult life for was within reach. David slid the folder across his polished desk. Due to budget constraints, we're letting you go. His eyes never met mine. Effective immediately, the room seemed to tilt slightly. Budget constraints. Silverline had just announced record profits last quarter. This is your severance package. He continued, tapping the folder with his manicured finger sign. By tomorrow, or get nothing, HR will escort you to clean out your desk. I should have felt anger shock, perhaps even the urge to plead. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't random. This was calculated, precisely timed to fall before my pension vested. Thank you for the opportunity, I said quietly, picking up the folder. I didn't open it. David looked surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or protests, but I'd spent my career examining patterns, and this one was clear as day. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked out with my dignity intact. Susan Avery from HR hovered awkwardly as I packed my personal items. The photo of my late husband, Richard Doyle, the potted plant my daughter had given me when she left for college 15 years ago, and the plaque I'd received for 25 years of service I didn't take. Most of what mattered couldn't fit in a cardboard box. I'm so sorry, Melody Susan Avery whispered, glancing nervously toward the security guard waiting to escort me out. This isn't right. It is what it is, I replied, but inside I knew better. This wasn't just wrong, it was potentially illegal. For the past 4 years, I'd been meticulously documenting financial irregularities that had accelerated since David joined the company. I'd sent detailed memos up the chain, flagged suspicious patterns, and even presented evidence of backdated reports. All of it had been dismissed, buried, or returned with instructions to focus on more pressing matters. As I walked through the lobby one last time, the security guard awkwardly held the door. "Have a good weekend, Mrs. Reynolds," he said clearly. Uncomfortable with his role in this charade, I nodded politely. I believe I will. The drive home felt surreal. 29 years of dedication ended with a blue binder and a cardboard box. The April rain tapped against my windshield as I navigated the familiar streets of St. Paul, Minnesota, past the cathedral where Richard Doyle and I had married, beyond the school, where our daughter had graduated, toward the modest home I'd maintained on my own since becoming a widow. 12 years ago, I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for Jarwi. Well, the missed recitals during those early years when I worked late to earn my promotions. The family vacations cut short when compliance emergencies arose. The countless evenings spent reviewing documentation that nobody else had the patience to examine. I'd given the company my prime years believing in the security that my pension would eventually provide. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat quietly for a moment, allowing myself to feel the weight of what had happened. Ethan Harris. The kitchen feels colder as Margaret Carter stares at the unsigned papers, her pulse pounding against the silence. Outside, the familiar hum of evening traffic underscores how quickly her world has narrowed to legal terms and deadlines. Her hand hovers above the signature line, nearly 30 years boxed into 6 impersonal paragraphs. If she walks away, what remains? If she fights, what comes next? The clock ticks louder. She reads the last line again, her resolve mixing with dread. What would happen if she refused to sign? She had dedicated nearly 3 decades to Silverline Industries, pouring her heart and soul into her work. Now, it felt like everything was slipping away. The severance package was an insult, a mere 3 months' salary in exchange for her silence. No pension, no health care, just a check and a legal trap designed to keep her quiet. They were counting on her fear and desperation to make her sign quickly without consulting anyone. Margaret had known this day would come. Ethan Harris, the new lead audit manager, had a reputation for ruthless cuts. They clashed when she refused to certify compliance on a cost-cutting initiative that skirted regulatory requirements. She hadn't anticipated how swiftly he would move to eliminate her, but she wasn't going down without a fight. She set the papers aside and walked to her home conference room. Behind a row of family photo albums sat a fireproof lockbox. For 4 years, she had meticulously documented troubling financial irregularities at Silverline, keeping detailed notes and saving emails. Not because she planned to use them, but because her instincts told her something was wrong. She opened the box and reviewed its contents. Loan applications with falsified data, quarterly reports with manipulated figures, emails instructing staff to backdate quality control certifications. It was all there, 1,000 pages of evidence showing systematic fraud that had accelerated under Ethan's direction. She had reported every issue through proper channels, only to be ignored or sidelined. The anger boiled within her. This wasn't just about her job. It was about standing up for her legacy, for the principles she believed in. She reached for her phone, heart racing. Should she call a lawyer? Was it time to take a stand? The rain began to fall softly outside, the scent of wet earth filling the air. Margaret inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of her choices. Would she let fear dictate her future, or would she fight for what she deserved? The decision loomed before her like a shadow. What would she choose? Scrolling to a contact I hadn't called in years, Gregory Santos had been Silverline's chief financial officer before leaving to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He'd always respected my diligence, even when others found it tedious. It's time, I thought, as my finger hovered over his name. The next morning, I woke with purpose after speaking with Gregory for nearly 2 hours. The previous evening, I had a clear path forward. I dressed carefully in the navy suit I reserved for important meetings, as if preparing for battle. In a way, I was. Gregory had listened intently as I outlined the situation and described the documentation I'd collected. His response was measured, but resolute. This isn't just wrongful termination. Melody, based on what you're describing, Silverline could be facing serious securities violations, the timing with your pension. That's just the tip of the iceberg. He'd explained the whistleblower protections available through the SEC and arranged for me to meet with his team on Monday morning. Warning, don't sign anything. He'd cautioned and secure those documents somewhere safe. I spent Saturday morning making copies of everything, organizing the evidence chronologically and preparing a detailed index. The work kept my mind focused, preventing the anger and hurt from overwhelming me. By noon, I had 3 identical packages ready, one for the SEC, one for my personal records, and one that would serve as leverage if needed. My phone rang several times throughout the day. Susan Avery from HR, Ethan Harris, even the company's general counsel. I let each call go to voicemail, listening to their increasingly urgent messages. Melody, we need that paperwork signed today. David's voice was tense. I can come by and pick it up, if that helps. The legal counsel was more direct, Miss Reynolds. It's Margaret inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of her choices. Would she let fear dictate her future, or would she fight for what she deserved? The decision loomed before her like a shadow. What would she choose? As the rain tapped gently against the window, she scrolled through her contacts, stopping at Gregory Santos. The name stirred memories. He had once been Silverline's chief financial officer. Today, he was her lifeline. After 2 hours of heartfelt conversation, Margaret felt a spark of hope reignite. She dressed carefully in her navy suit, as if preparing for battle. It was time to reclaim her dignity. Don't sign anything, Gregory warned, his voice steady. "You've got more power than you realize." He outlined serious violations surrounding her termination and the potential for whistleblower protection. A fire ignited in her chest. It was time to act. Saturday was consumed by organizing her case. With everything meticulously documented, she prepared for battle. Copies were made, evidence arranged. She needed to ensure her efforts wouldn't be in vain. Her phone rang repeatedly. Each call went unanswered. Ethan Harris's tense voice echoed in her mind, pleading for documents to be signed. "It's imperative," he insisted. At 4:30 p.m., a familiar figure appeared at her door. David, in his sharp suit, commanded a presence that felt intrusive. "Sign the papers, and we can all move on," he urged. She remained silent, resisting the urge to rise. Instead, she watched as he dropped an envelope in her mailbox, finally returning to his luxury SUV. Inside was yet another ultimatum. Final opportunity, signed by 9:20 a.m., Monday. Later, her daughter Elizabeth called. "Mom, what's going on? You sound different." Margaret hesitated. Could she shield Elizabeth from this storm? "I was terminated yesterday," she replied. "What? You're days away from your pension. They can't do that." "They did." "Mom, do you need me to come home?" "No, sweetheart. Stay in Denver. I've got this covered." As darkness enveloped her, thoughts of Monday's meeting with the SEC weighed heavily. She had trusted the system for years, but now loyalty felt like a prison. Silverline had made its choice, and now she had to make hers. She would not sign their agreement. The kitchen lights glinted off the envelope as Margaret gripped it, heart pounding in her chest. Elizabeth's worried voice crackled through the phone, but Margaret hesitated. Should she reveal the truth? The weight of her silence pressed in. Outside, headlights swept past her window. Was someone watching? With dawn approaching and her future at stake, Margaret faced a choice. Protect her legacy or risk everything. What would she tell her daughter? "I wouldn't be silenced. I wouldn't let them erase 3 decades of my life without consequences." Monday couldn't come soon enough. When it finally arrived, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I dressed meticulously, placing my documentation into a secure briefcase. As I drove downtown to the Federal Building, the weight of what I was about to do sat heavily on my shoulders. But beneath that weight, there was an undeniable sense of rightness. The SEC offices were understated yet imposing. Glass partitions and hushed conversations filled the air. Gregory met me in the lobby, his familiar face lined with years but still carrying the sharp intelligence I remembered. "Margaret," he said warmly, shaking my hand, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "It's good to see you, Gregory," I replied. "Thank you for taking this seriously." He led me to a conference room where 2 other investigators waited. Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney, and James Weston, a forensic accountant, greeted me with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Reynolds," Angela began, her tone serious. "Before we start, I want to confirm that you understand the process we're initiating today. Once you share this information with us, an investigation becomes official. There's no turning back." I nodded. I understand completely. For the next 3 hours, I walked them through my documentation. The irregular financial reporting I'd first noticed 4 years ago when shipments didn't match invoices, the quality control certifications that had been backdated after products had already been shipped, and the pattern of revenue manipulation that had intensified in recent quarters, particularly after Ethan Harris's arrival. James examined the financial documents with growing concern. "These discrepancies aren't small," he noted. "The company has been systematically overstating revenues by at least 18%. Suddenly, I felt a sharp intake of breath in the room. The gravity of my findings settled around us like a heavy fog. Then came that moment, the one I had anticipated with both dread and hope. Just as I was about to share my personal ordeal, Angela slid a blue binder forward. It wasn't filled with reports about me, but with evidence implicating Ethan, Susan, and even Gregory in a broader orchestrated pension fraud. The hum of distant elevators cut through the stunned silence, and my heart raced. I realized in that instant that I wasn't just defending my legacy. I might be central to exposing a sweeping conspiracy. Could I trust Gregory? Would I be safe now that I had crossed this line? My resolve wavered as I stared at the evidence. The stakes had escalated far beyond my personal fight. As I took a deep breath, the scent of rain wafted through the air, mingling with the tension that hung between us. I was no longer just a victim. I was now a whistleblower standing at the precipice of something much larger than myself. Would I have the strength to follow through? Would my actions protect my family's legacy or lead to an even deeper betrayal? I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The truth was finally coming to light. Angela's voice faded as she gathered her files, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Melody's heart pounded, the weight of her words hanging in the stale conference room air. A distant phone rang, unanswered. Ethan's door remained closed, a silent barrier. Melody clenched her blue binder tight. Had she just set something irreversible in motion? Would anyone truly listen this time? Or had she just painted a target on her own back? For 2 long years, Melody had reported securities fraud. Each time she was met with dismissals. "You're misinterpreting the data," they'd say. But when Ethan joined 6 months ago, her concerns vanished into his conference room, never to be seen again. Gregory leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You believe your termination was directly related to these reports?" "Without question," she replied, her voice steady. "The timing, 3 days before my pension vested, makes it obvious. I flagged major issues with Ethan's cost-cutting initiative. He needed me gone before I could escalate further." As their meeting concluded, Angela outlined the next steps. "We'll need your formal statement. Then we'll begin our investigation. It typically remains confidential until we determine whether enforcement action is warranted." "How long will that take?" Melody asked, anxiety creeping in. "It varies," Angela replied. "But given your documentation, we may move quickly." Before she even returned home, her phone rang. It was Susan from HR, her voice trembling. "Melody, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. Ethan's been locked in his conference room all morning, and there are rumors about SEC investigators contacting our general counsel." So it had begun, faster than she'd anticipated. "Did you report something?" Susan hesitated. "I simply did what I should have done years ago," Melody replied, her heart racing. "What's happening with my pension paperwork? That's why I'm calling. The executive committee is reviewing your termination. They've put everything on hold until further notice." An hour later, her phone rang again. The tension in the air was palpable. Would this be the moment she'd been waiting for? Would her fight for justice finally pay off? Or would it lead to an even deeper betrayal? The truth was finally coming to light, but at what cost? The phone's shrill ring shattered the heavy silence in Melody Carter's living room, like a clap of thunder after a storm. The scent of rain lingered in the air, mingling with the fading memories captured in the family photos around her. Each image tugged at her heart, a reminder of the life she had built and the battles she had fought. She stared at her reflection in the glass. Would this call tip the balance of her hard-earned legacy? What would she risk by answering? The voice on the other end was unmistakable. William Hargrove, chairman of the board, a man who once barely acknowledged her presence. "Miss Reynolds," he began, his confident tone faltering, "we seem to have a situation that requires your input. Would you be willing to come to the conference room tomorrow morning?" "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Hargrove," she replied coolly. "Any discussions should include my attorney and potentially representatives from the SEC. I'm sure you understand." The silence that followed was heavy. "Perhaps we can arrange something more formal then," he finally replied. As she hung up, She felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. She never sought this. All she wanted was to do her job with integrity and retire secure. But Silverline Industries had left her no choice. Now the consequences loomed ominously over them all. Calls flooded in that night, colleagues desperate for news and executives scrambling to manage the fallout. She answered none, thinking back to the moment she couldn't ignore any longer. By morning, the storm had broken wide open. Local business outlets flashed headlines about an SEC investigation into Silverline, and the company's stock plummeted. Suddenly, the very strategy Ethan Harris championed came under fire. Analysts who lauded his efficiency just weeks prior now questioned the integrity of the entire reporting system. In a desperate attempt to salvage reputation, she received a formal letter withdrawing her termination notice and placing her on administrative leave with benefits. However, it felt like an empty gesture, coming far too late. At 10 a.m., the mysterious call from her attorney, Barbara Reynolds, pierced the tension. Would this shed light on the path forward, or was it another layer of betrayal? Would justice finally find a home, or would the battle take more from her still? The truth may have come to light, but at what cost? The rain had just stopped, leaving the city streets around Silverline Industries glistening in the morning light. In the lobby, the faint scent of wet pavement drifted in as Margaret Carter entered, her attorney by her side. Even the security guard, who once watched her leave in shame, now nodded with something close to respect. All around, employees huddled in small groups, their hushed conversations cut off as she passed. The tension was almost physical. Every eye seemed to follow Margaret as she made her way to the boardroom. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights revealed every strained expression. William Hargrove, chairman of the board, looked like he hadn't slept in days. The company's outside counsel sat stone-faced, 3 other board members at their side. Ethan Harris, the executive whose decisions had started this storm, was nowhere to be seen. The silence was broken by William's voice, brittle and formal. "Thank you for coming, Miss Carter." He tried to sound in control, but his words stumbled. "We've started a comprehensive internal investigation into your concerns." Before Margaret could answer, her attorney, Barbara, cut in, her voice sharp. "Let's be clear, Mr. Hargrove. Miss Carter did not suddenly raise these concerns after her termination. She documented and reported them, again and again, for 4 years. Your company chose to ignore her warnings, then dismissed her just days before her pension vested. That says it all." William shifted in his chair, glancing at the empty spot where Ethan Harris should have sat. "Yes, well, that's exactly what we're investigating. I want to assure Ms. Carter that her termination has been rescinded. She's still an employee in good standing. All benefits, including her pension, are intact." Margaret looked him in the eye. "My pension." He nodded, eager. "Of course. In fact, we'd like to offer you a consulting role after your retirement. You could start immediately if you wish. We value your expertise." Barbara put up a hand, stopping him cold. "My client isn't making any decisions today. Before you discuss her future, there needs to be a full accounting of how her previous concerns were suppressed." The meeting pressed on for another hour. The board members tried to distance themselves from Ethan's actions. They spoke in careful, rehearsed tones. They painted themselves as victims of a bad system, not the architects. The blue binder of evidence sat between them and Margaret, a silent accusation. Through the wide conference room window, Margaret could see clouds drifting past the Cleveland skyline. The world kept moving, indifferent to the struggle within these walls. Every now and then she caught the rustle of leaves outside, a gentle reminder of everything she risked to defend her legacy. What would happen if they failed to take real responsibility? Would Silverline Industries truly change, or would the truth be buried again? As the boardroom emptied, Margaret gathered her papers, her resolve deepening. She could almost hear Richard's steady voice in her mind, reminding her why she fought, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been overlooked or pushed aside. The question lingered as she walked out into the late morning air. Was this the beginning of real change, or just another performance for the record? The answer waited, just out of reach as the story pressed forward. The tension in the air was palpable. The conference room reeked of burnt coffee and old carpet glue. Years ago, Margaret Carter's hands trembled as she pressed her first memo into a corporate inbox, her heart pounding under the humming fluorescent lights. The paper felt rough, her pen leaving a smudge. Even then, her voice was steady, but her palms were slick. She remembers the hopeful ache in her chest as she waited for change, an ache that never quite faded. Now, as she faced the board, the weight of their indifference hung heavy. "Victims of misinformation," they murmured, expressing shock and disappointment at the apparent misconduct. Margaret remained mostly silent, letting Barbara handle the legal maneuvering while she observed their body language. These were people she'd worked alongside for years, yet they'd never truly seen her. Now they couldn't look away, their expressions a mix of fear and newfound respect. As they prepared to leave, William made one final appeal. "Margaret, we're hoping you might consider speaking with the SEC investigators about the corrective actions we're taking. Your support would be invaluable." She looked at him directly for the first time. "Mr. Hargrove, I've spent 29 years dedicated to this company's compliance. During that time, I filed 47 major reports documenting serious irregularities. I sent 16 memos specifically addressing the issues now under investigation. I requested 9 meetings with executive leadership to discuss these concerns, of which only 2 were granted, and neither resulted in action. At what point in that history did I have your support?" The room fell silent. "I'll cooperate fully with both the internal investigation and the SEC," she continued, her voice steady. "But I'll be speaking only to the facts, as I always have. Whether those facts support or damage Silverline will depend entirely on what you do next, not what you say in this room." As Barbara and Margaret walked out, Barbara whispered, "That was perfectly stated." It wasn't until they reached the parking lot that Margaret allowed herself a deep breath. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to fade, leaving her drained but clear-headed. This wasn't victory. Not yet. It was merely the beginning of accountability. "What happens now?" Margaret asked, standing beside her car. Barbara smiled slightly. "Now, they scramble to save what they can while the investigation continues. But—" The pause hung in the air, thick with uncertainty. Would Silverline truly change, or would the truth be buried again? Margaret felt the rustle of leaves outside, a gentle reminder of everything she risked to defend her legacy. The question lingered as she stepped into the late morning air. Was this the beginning of real change, or just another performance for the record? The answer waited, just out of reach as the story pressed forward. "Make no mistake, Melody, they're terrified of you." I shook my head. "They're not terrified of me. They're terrified of the truth. Truth, there's a difference." Barbara nodded thoughtfully. "There is, indeed. And that difference is why you'll win this regardless of how it plays out." As I drove home, I wondered what Richard Doyle would have thought of all this. My late husband had always encouraged my meticulous nature, even when others found it frustrating your attention to detail. "Isn't a quirk, Melody," he'd say. It's a superpower. Perhaps he'd been right all along by Friday. Exactly 1 week after my termination, the story had evolved into a full-blown corporate scandal. The SEC had issued formal requests for information from Silverline, and an internal memo from William Harrove announced Ethan Harris's immediate suspension. Pending investigation, the company's stock had dropped nearly 30%, triggering concerns from major investors and partners. I was no longer just Margaret Carter, overlooked compliance officer. Business journals now refer to me as a whistleblower, and the woman who exposed Granwell the sudden attention was uncomfortable. But I remained focused on the process, working closely with the SEC investigators, who now had offices set up in a separate building near Grant's headquarters. The evidence ID provided had opened many doors, but the investigation was revealing even more troubling patterns. Gregory called to update me on their progress. "Melody, it's worse than we thought." "Thought," he said, his voice grave. "The financial manipulation goes back at least 5 years, predating Langston. He accelerated it, but he didn't start it. I suspected as much," I replied. "There were irregularities I couldn't fully document because I couldn't access certain executive-level reports. Well, we can access them now." Gregory continued, "And they tell a story of systematic fraud designed to inflate the company's value. The board is claiming ignorance, but at least 3 members had to have known they signed off on key transactions. This news should have vindicated me, but instead it left me feeling hollow. The company I dedicated my life to had been corrupted at levels. Even I hadn't fully comprehended the people I trusted with my concerns had been actively participating in the very fraud. I was reporting that afternoon. I received a call from Elizabeth. Her voice was tight with anger. "Mom, have you seen the news? They're trying to credit you." I hadn't. I'd been avoiding media coverage, focusing instead on the official proceedings. "What are they saying?" I asked calmly that GRW executive Langston gave an interview claiming, "You had performance issues and were bitter about being passed over for promotion. He's making it sound like you're retaliating because of personal grievances." I wasn't surprised. It was a predictable defense strategy attack. The whistleblower credibility, rather than address the allegations. "It doesn't matter." "Elizabeth," I assured her, "the evidence speaks for itself. My performance reviews have been exemplary for 29 years. They can't rewrite that history now." But David was trying to do exactly that by that evening. Several news outlets had picked up his narrative, questioning my motives and suggesting I had manipulated documentation to frame him. It was a desperate move from a desperate man, but it still stung to see my integrity questioned so publicly. Barbara called immediately. "Don't respond to any of it." She advised the SEC will issue a statement tomorrow, clarifying your whistleblower status and the credibility of your evidence. Let the official channels handle this. I wasn't planning to respond, I told her, but I am going to do something else the next morning. In the hushed confines of the bank's private room, the low hum of the security vault mingles with Melody's racing pulse. She slides open her safe deposit box, the crisp crackle of the sealed envelope breaking years of silence. What she thought would be mere background evidence now reveals its true power, a concrete thread connecting Ethan's troubles to long-buried boardroom manipulation. Melody's hands tremble as she realizes her legacy doesn't just hinge on recent injustices. It's part of a larger, darker pattern she's ready to expose. How did it come to this? After dedicating nearly 3 decades to Silverline Industries, she finds herself fighting for her dignity. The company she trusted has turned against her, led by Ethan Harris, a calculating figure who thrives on corporate downsizing and delivering gut-wrenching news. He's determined to enforce budget constraints, even if it means sacrificing the very people who built the company. As she drives to meet Gregory, her heart is heavy. The rain outside mirrors her turmoil, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing within the corporate walls. She recalls her daughter Elizabeth's voice, tight with anger, warning her about the media's twisted narrative. "They're trying to credit you," Elizabeth had said, her frustration palpable. But Melody knows the truth. She remembers the loving support of her late husband, Richard, whose absence weighs heavily on her. He believed in her, and now she must honor that legacy. Arriving at the meeting, she hands Gregory the envelope. "This changes everything," she asserts, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around her. The emergency board meeting is set for Monday, just days after her termination. She may not be there, but she can feel the tension building. Gregory's voice crackles through the phone. "It's chaos in there. The SEC just presented their findings. 3 board members have resigned." In that moment, Melody feels a flicker of hope. The truth is finally surfacing, and she's ready to reclaim her narrative. Will justice prevail, or will the corporate machine crush her spirit once more? The stakes have never been higher, and the battle for her legacy is just beginning. Spot David is trying to claim he was following established practices, but no one's buying it anymore. By noon, Silverline issued a press release announcing a leadership restructuring and full cooperation with regulatory authorities. The carefully worded statement confirmed the resignation of 4 board members, including William Hargrove, and the termination of Ethan Harris for cause. The company's stock, already battered, dropped another 12% that afternoon. My phone rang. It was Susan Avery from HR again. The interim CEO wants to meet with you tomorrow. If possible, the interim CEO was Patricia Donovan, the former chief operating officer who had always treated me with professional respect, if not warmth. I agreed to the meeting, but insisted it take place at my attorney's conference room when Patricia arrived the next day. She looked exhausted, but determined Melody. I won't waste time with pleasantries. She began, "The company is in crisis, and you're at the center of it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you were the only one who consistently did what was right." She slid a folder across the table, eerily similar to the termination paperwork David had presented just 11 days earlier. "This officially rescinds your termination, reinstates your employment retroactively, and confirms your full pension vesting." She explained it also includes an additional compensation package recognizing the difficulties you've experienced. I opened the folder. The compensation package included a sum equal to 5 years of my salary-full health care coverage for life and a formal apology from the board. "We're also establishing a new corporate ethics division." Patricia continued, "We'd like you to help design it as a consultant after your retirement. Your experience is invaluable." I closed the folder without commenting on the offer, and Ethan Harris, the board members involved, Patricia's the truth in such a painful way. But I don't regret my commitment to doing what was right. As the judge's gavel echoed through the hushed courtroom, a federal prosecutor's voice cut through the tension. "Ms. Reynolds, would you please stand?" For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Every eye turned. The revelation followed. Melody's detailed compliance logs, submitted in secret months before, had been the fulcrum for every charge. Her quiet diligence had not only toppled the powerful but redefined her own legacy, no longer invisible, but indispensable. The air was thick with anticipation as the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Ethan Harris, once the authoritative figure, now sat defeated, his calculating demeanor stripped away. The scent of rain lingered outside, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within those walls. Months earlier, Melody had faced the unthinkable, forced retirement before her pension, a bitter injustice that threatened to erase her years of dedication. But she stood resilient, determined to maintain her dignity and assert her self-worth. In the midst of this corporate chaos, Susan Avery, the awkward HR representative, was just trying to fulfill her professional duty. She delivered uncomfortable news, her voice trembling as she navigated the fallout of corporate downsizing. Meanwhile, Richard Doyle, Melody's late husband, lingered in her thoughts, a loving presence that symbolized past support and personal loss. His memory fueled her fight against ageism and corporate ethics violations, reminding her of the family values she held dear. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the stakes were higher than ever. Would justice prevail? Would Melody reclaim her legacy? The tension was palpable, each moment stretching into eternity. Finally, the verdict was announced. David and his accomplices pleaded guilty to securities fraud. The man who had once wielded power over her now faced the consequences of his actions. With the SEC's substantial whistleblower payment and her pension secured, Melody found herself in a position she never imagined. She established a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in corporate ethics, ensuring her legacy would inspire future generations. As she sat by the lakeside with her family, watching the sunset paint the sky, she reflected on her journey. The struggles had been immense, but the triumphs were sweeter. In the end, she had not only defended her legacy but had also become a beacon of hope for others. In a world where corporate giants often overshadow the individual, Margaret Carter emerged as a true hero, proving that integrity and resilience can indeed change the course of history. Them. But I don't regret my work there. Integrity isn't just about being honest when it's easy. It's about maintaining your principles, especially when it costs you something. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. You taught me that. Not with words, but by example, that I realized was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all. Not the vindication. Not the financial security, but the knowledge that my choices had shown my daughter what it meant to stand firm in your values, regardless of the consequences. As for Jijjigamu, well, manufacturing the company had survived. Though greatly diminished, the new leadership had implemented stringent compliance protocols and transparent reporting practices. They still sent me their annual reports, perhaps as a reminder, perhaps as an apology. I read them carefully, noting the improved practices with Prof. Professional satisfaction. Some might see my story as one of revenge, but I've never viewed it that way. I simply did what I had always done, documented the facts, reported the truth, and stood by my findings. The difference is that this time, finally, others were forced to listen.